Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. And welcome to the 2025-2026 Winter Ware Board Workshop, where we are working on all things clay. Y'all, in this video, I am going to be showing you how to use the Coil method to make these amazing cookie jars. Look at them. Oh, look at them. So, just because you're doing Coil does not mean that it has to be a round shape. This turned out to be one of my favorite ones, this Victorian. So we're going to be doing a bunch of coiling, and I'm going to show you some techniques to make these cookie jars. So come on, let's do this. To get me going on the Coil technique, I like to prep all of my stuff and get it ready to go. I have a board here. This is just a piece of plywood. It's also called a ware board. And I have some newspaper that I am going to place on here. I'm not taping the newspaper down. When you begin working with your clay, as soon as you open the bag, it begins to start shrinking on you. And as it shrinks, it moves around. Placing a piece of paper on your ware board here and not taping it down, when you place your clay on top of it, it allows to move. The newspaper goes with the movement of the clay and it prevents your piece from cracking. That's why you also don't want to tape it down. I'm just kind of tucking it under so that I don't have paper flopping all around. So I'm going to set that aside for a second. I have my slip here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut myself a piece of clay. I'm going to be rolling a slab. I have my wire cutters. If you're using a slab roller, you're going to use the same process to cut this clay. Today I'm just going to use a rolling pin. So I have a chunk of my clay and I like to take this in one go. I want to use as much of the slab shape as I possibly can already. Taking a nice piece of clay from the widest part of the chunk. Step number one, it kind of helps you get there. I am going to pound this a little bit flatter. If you're using a slab roller, I do have a video on how to use a slab roller, so I will link that below. You can use that for instructions, but for today, we're going to be using this rolling pin, and I'm using this rolling pin to get me a little bit of my hammering done so I can flatten this out a little bit more. The more I can squish this down to where I want it, the faster I will get my rolling done. So the less rolling, less labor in the rolling for me. Sometimes I like the tossing method, pulling it and stretching it as I toss it. Alright, now I can come in with my rolling pin. And then you're going to roll this out to the desired thickness that you want for the bottom. I want to try and aim for roughly the thickness of what I anticipate my coils to be. And as my main rule, whenever I'm making anything out of clay, I want every thickness level to be no thicker than the handle of this fettling knife, no matter what it is. So my bottom shouldn't be any thicker than this, and then the coils that I begin to build should not be any thicker than this. This looks like about 3/8 of an inch thick here, and I think that's going to work just fine for me. I want to find something round that I'm going to be tracing. I just have this lid. You could literally use anything round you can find, and I'm going to take the tip of my fettling knife and just come around and score. Scoring is just putting a small shallow mark into my clay, because if I should make a mistake here, let's say I carved into it and I didn't like it, as long as it's only scoring, I can just blend it away. But if I cut all the way through my slab, then I'm in danger zone, because slab does not like to get smacked back together all that easily without creating a ton of air bubbles. So just imagine if you are trying to glue two sheets of paper on edge to each other. That's what happens when you try to join slab back up. It's not a good connection. It's not stable, and oftentimes wherever that rejoin comes back together, you end up with cracks. And I think now that I've determined this is okay, I can now take my fettling knife and go back in and actually make the cut. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my circle, and I'm going to place my circle onto my board. that I'm going to be working with, and now I'm probably never going to pick up the circle until this pot is done. That's the beauty of having it on this board and on this paper. Anytime I need to move my piece around, I can just pick up the board and protect the integrity of this piece. I'm going to be moving the board only. Now this slab, you do not want to just smack up and re-roll because you will end up with a bunch of air bubbles. So you can do a process called wedging where you have to come in and knead the heck out of this thing over and over and over again until you work out all of those air bubbles. And basically it's just like kneading a dough. You're kind of pushing into it. And then I like to do a little bit of a wrist spin where I'm pulling it towards me and pushing. Pulling and pushing, and this can be a whole lot of labor, and you can go through all of this trouble, and then when you go to test it, we test it by cutting it open. After, pretend I kneaded this a whole bunch, but you cut it open and then you still could end up with a bunch of air bubbles. Personally, I usually just save these kinds of scraps to use for coil, because coil building, I know I'm going to be squeezing out most of the air and I don't have to worry about creating air pockets. If you do intend to re-roll this into a slab, you're going to have to do some manual labor and really make sure you work the heck out of it doing your kneading. My favorite tools to use for scoring is a serrated rib, and this is a metal rib that has little teeth on it to help you do your scoring. Now if you don't have one of these, you certainly can get by with, where did it go? Using a needle tool or using a fork, but basically what you're doing is you're creating some scrape marks or score marks, that's why it's called scoring, along your piece to make it so that you can adhere the coil to the base or whatever two pieces that you're joining. So you could use your needle tool, but needle tools can take forever because you have to sit here and do this kind of action. Whereas with my serrated rib, I can very quickly just dig into this space and I have a nice groove to go. Some people like to do it in two opposite directions, so after I go in one direction, I will go in the other, like cross hatching, just to give myself some good scoring. And this tool is very quick and effective. If you don't have a serrated rib, like I said, you could use a needle tool, you could use a fork, or maybe you have a wire brush tool. So I've got my scoring done. I'm going to go ahead and apply some slip to this. Now I'm taking some scrap clay, or you can use fresh clay, but this clay I had was the leftover from around the slab when I cut it. And I'm just going to take a chunk in my hand and I'm going to start squishing. And I'm going to just look for where it's uneven and squish there. And my goal here with all of this squishing is to get close to the thickness of the handle of this fettling knife. So I'm going to keep squishing. I don't want it thinner, I just want to be close. And anywhere that there's too big of a lump, I'm twisting it enough to where I can get at that lump. I'm just looking for those lumps to kind of squish them out. The better I do at this squishing, the quicker and less work it's going to be for rolling those coils. I am getting close to the range I want to be at. This is probably goody good. Now I'm going to throw my coil down and I'm going to use the palms of my hands only, not my fingertips. If I use my fingertips, I'm going to make this even more lumpy. So I'm using the palm of my hands and I'm going to start at the center. And I'm just putting a gentle pressure. Imagine you have a raw egg underneath your palm. If you push too hard, you're going to crack that egg. So you want to think about that pressure. It's just a very light pressure. You're just getting rid of the lumps. And I'm only using the palms of my hands. A very light pressure, starting at the center. And I'm getting rid of what I left lumpy. You should not be down here rolling this coil for very long, because you should have squished your way close to the thickness of what you needed, and that you're only down here smoothing it out. You're not doing any real rolling, you're just smoothing. You get a little bit of stretching, but for the most part, it's getting rid of those lumps. I know I can't be any thicker than this handle when I go to build my coils, but I am a little heavy-handed with my blending. So I like to stay just slightly thicker than this handle so that when I blend, I don't blend too thin and I still have some meat on the pot as I begin to build it up. So I'm going to take my serrated rib and I'm going to score my coil. And now I can plop it down on top of this surface. I'm going to come around and I only need to slip and score the first layer of every work session. So this is the beginning of my work session. I only need to have that first layer slip and scored. Now this next one, I can just plop right on top of it. and then continue to roll some more coil. Alright, so I have slip on that first layer. I'm going to continue on my coiling, and I don't need to add any more slip because this is the same work session, so I don't need to add any more slip. I only needed it at the bottom. Before I start blending this, just so you can see, I want to show you how I blend out the bottom. Sometimes I will only put the first layer coil on first just to make it a little easier. I'm going to just take my finger and I am going to press down, pulling bits of that clay and smushing it down to blend the inside layer. Now sometimes this can be a little bit difficult and you need a little more oomph because the slip can be wet. So I will take the back end of my fettling knife if it's a little too difficult and just use that to push bits of that clay down. This gets it done pretty fast. And then I will take my finger and get on in there and blend it out smooth so that I'm no longer looking at those pressing marks that I just made with the back end of the fettling knife. Okay, now that's the inside of my pot. And sometimes this first layer is going to be much trickier than all of the other because you have a slab to coil connection. You can, again, just take your finger and blend that coil into itself, or sometimes I will just take the fettling knife and use that to press down. For the most part, I will use my fingers to do the majority of my blending with the exception of this first coil, because somehow just blending out this first coil can be tricky getting it onto that base. So I'm pressing and really trying to pull those two together. Slip is not magic glue. It is only there to assist you. You have to really blend your clay together in order to get a good connection so that it doesn't come apart. Any little scraps that I'm pulling off from my piece as I'm blending or whatever, I'm just throwing into my slip bucket because this is going to continue to just keep generating more slip for me. Plop that coil back on that I have just rolled, and I can continue rolling some more before I blend. Sometimes I like to get up a good 5 layers or so. I don't like to go any more than 5, so I'll get somewhere between 3 to 5 layers of coil before I start blending. So again, I'm doing my squishing, and looking, turning it as I need to just to get those lumps out wherever I see them. So as I'm turning it, it's just to look at where the lumps fall uneven. And if I have clay that was pressed into a slab, this process of squishing and rolling coils pretty much removes most of the air bubbles, so you don't really need to worry too much with using up those small bits of pieces in coil making. And as long as it's not thicker than the handle of that fettling knife in the end, when you do finish your blending, then you don't really have to worry about those air pockets. Now, if you're getting flatness, it's because you're pressing too hard in one section. So if your coil is flattening out, it's because you put too much pressure with your hand. So I can flip this up and then sort of press it down a little bit more and then go back to, consciously remember, okay, I pushed too much there. I got to be a lighter touch. After we get going here, I'm going to show you some other shapes that I have made, not just round vessels. You can do square shapes as well. I'm going to blend from the outside, and if I take my thumb and I blend in the downward motion and start blending these coils down, what starts to happen is my walls want to push out into the side. And this is going to depend on how heavy-handed you are. So if you're someone who blends really hardcore and really moves the clay around, you're going to have a much more drastic, as you blend in the downward motion on the outside, it wants to pull your wall to the outside. If you blend the coil in the upward motion from the outside, you see it starts to want to push the shape in and coming inward. This is one way you can control the direction or the shape of your vessel or your pot or your cookie jar in this case. Now for the inside, if I blend down on the inside, instead of pushing it out, it's actually drawing it in and starting to pull that shape in. But if I blend up on the inside, it's starting to push my shape out. So you're going to want to consciously think about that and the way that you shape your piece. I stacked my coils directly on top of themselves, and for this shape I want to have more of a upright straight cylinder. If I blend, for me, on the outside pressing down and it pulls it out, then for the inside I'm going to blend down, so that way it pulls it back in if I want that cylinder. So I want to make sure that if I'm trying to get an upright, straight thing, that I blend in opposite directions on the outside and the inside so it sort of evens itself out. Do this one more time. I'm blending downwards on the outside, which sort of pulled my pot out a little bit. So from the inside, I'm going to go ahead and blend it down again to pull it back in. Now if my goal was to have this come out like a bowl, I'd be blending on the outside and then blending up on the inside so that I can get that change in direction. This one is going to be a wine bottle shape, so I want this to be a cylinder until I get to the very top of the end. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of my blending on the outside down, get all of those coils nice and blended together. And it is okay that I have a lot of movement of clay, hand lump. You see a lot of lumpiness right now. I'm not worried about that at the moment. I'm just worried about making sure I blend all of those coils together. I'm just trying to be a little more conscious since I want it to come upright, not to push too much on my shape. And now on the inside, because I blended it down and it sort of kicked it out, I'm going to go ahead and blend it down again from the inside so I can draw it back in. Early on, I want to make sure I try and keep the inside of my pot as clean as possible because this is going to be a cookie jar and it will be a little difficult to get in here and do the smoothing if I get too crazy big and don't pay attention to the inside. And you want a nice smooth inside, especially if it's something that's going to be functioning for food. It just makes it easier to clean. You don't want to have little bits of clay that things can get stuck on. I'm going to continue on making some more coils here. I can just pick up where I left off. This coil ended here. I'm going to continue on here, stacking the next one. Now if you want a more drastic change, then alter where you stack the coil. So maybe you want it to come out really wide, like a big pot. Then I can stack my coil slightly on the outside. Or maybe I'm trying to bring it in. You know, I can stack my coil slightly on the inside. And when I blend, I'm just going to be conscious of making this nice and feathered as I blend so that it still comes in, but I don't have this like sharp edge. You don't want to start and stop at the same spot each time. You want to think about this like bricklaying. The bricks, when they lay them, they stagger them so that they have a full brick covering the joint. So when this comes around again, I want to make sure that it laps over that so that way I have a good strong joint. If every time you ended and started at the same point, you'd have a weakness. And even though you blended it, you'd have this weak section that could become easily cracked and break apart. So you want to make sure that you always start and end at a different point. If for some reason you keep landing in the same spot, just break off your coil so that you start at a different area the next time and you can save this piece for another spot. I'm going to pop this down here. So see, I ended at a different point, and as long as I'm covering that joint the next time, it's going to be nice and strong. And then this will end somewhere else, and that piece I set aside I can pop back on here and keep building. If you have these drastic changes in direction, your pot might start to get floppy on you, and it might tell you it's time to take a break. And you'll know where if you start adding things and it feels really floppy and not stable, especially if you have drastic changes of directions, that might be time to throw some plastic over it, let it set up overnight, or throw it out in the sun for maybe 10-15 minutes and let it get stiffened up before you can continue on and work again. If you are going to do that though, never do it without blending your coils first. So if you put on some fresh coils and you felt like, oh, the bottom's unstable or whatever, or you're gonna get ready to wrap it up, you need to step away from it. You need to make sure you blend your coils first. Because if you don't blend your coils and this stiffens up, it's gonna be too difficult to do later on. So this is that point where I said I only like to do about between 3 to 5 coils before I blend. I don't want to get too crazy with just stacking things. So after every 3 to 5 coils, I do my blending. I usually don't like to be more than a thumb deep of blend. So for me, this is actually a little too high because that last bottom coil is too far away from my thumb reach of me putting this here and blending. So I should have only done 3 coils, but that's all right. So it's take a little bit much for me to get in there. There's something about being able to keep this hand on the outside and support it as I blend that I really like as a technique because it helps me feel in between my fingers the thickness that I'm leaving behind and also provide some stability so I don't lose control over the shape So this might be a time for stopping. I do have an unevenness where this side is a little shorter than this side. I personally do not like walking away with it being uneven, especially if it's right before a drastic shape change. So I would probably throw on one more coil from here to here just to even this out before I wrapped it up, to give it time to rest before you come back to it on another day. When I last left this work session, I came in only a little bit because I knew that this was not going to be able to take the whole weight of the cylinder once I put the, the wine bottle top on this one. So this is now my new work session because I gave it some time to set up, and you can see it's no longer floppy as I touch this. It's goody, goody, goody. So I'm going to be slipping and scoring my first coil that's going to pop on here. And I do have a very specific break line in an effort to keep this round even. I have been cutting my coil, and to do that I just have a little overlap. Now this part of the coil I rolled a little too thin, so I'm going to go ahead and cut right through the two, and this should give me where they match up. I am also paying attention to where the last one ended is here, so I want to make sure that I have a full coil going over that span. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and score this up. Always messy when you're adding that slip in, which is another reason why you just don't want to slip and score every single layer. It's not necessary. You only want to do it for new work sessions, but it also can be very difficult to do your blending, and it makes everything a little vulnerable. Things fall apart if you're slipping and scoring every single layer. You only need it between those new work sessions. I can go ahead now, stack on top again, because I'm going to just continue this directly up. I'm not changing shape, it's going to be cylindrical. Now I did have to give it that rest, because to put this full cylinder that I'm going to be building up right here in this neck would have been too much, and the whole thing would have collapsed on me. That's why I just went in a little bit, give it a nice sturdy place to start my buildup on top of. And so when you're changing directions, I always give it an overnight rest, or at least some time in the sun to really stiffen up and get stabilized before I continue on a directional change. So that means that you're no longer building up straight. If you're going out or coming in and you want to make a directional change, you want to give your coil some time to set up, to build up a nice sound structure before you make that change. I have this oval shape that I have been working on, and I just want to show you how to do a little bit of smoothing and fixing of your shapes. Normally I have a wood paddle, and apparently I did not drag it out. I have no idea where the heck it is. But I'm going to be using the back of this wire brush, which is basically the same as a wooden paddle because it's made out of wood. So take your wooden paddle, not your wire brush back, and this will help you deal with big lumps that might be misshapen. And you're just going to tap along, and this will help move big bumps or smack things sort of back into place if you have large lumps going on your piece. Now, one of the other methods I like to use is to take either a wooden rib or a rubber rib, if you have one, and use that to do blending. It should be clean, fairly clean. And so you're just going to take one of the flat ends of that rib and use it to draw and push around your clay to give yourself some smoothing action. I did this to the round one right before I set it out in the sun, so I got rid of all of my finger marks from all the blending I did. Now, if you don't have a wooden rib, you could also use the back end of your metal rib, the serrated rib, but the side without the little serrated edges. That'll help you do some of that blending as well. Sometimes you don't know where the big lumps are, and you have to do this part of it first, and it'll reveal to you wherever the heck those lumps are that have been left behind. So rubber rib sometimes is also the way to go. Any one of those three types of ribs will help you out. If you have a shore form, you could also use a shore form here, but I would caution you to only use your shore form, also known as a cheese grater. You only want to use that if your walls are thick enough to do shaving. If you're unsure about the thickness of your walls, you're better off sticking with one of the rib versions to push around your clay and do your smoothing. Because I'm working with B-Mix, this is fairly soft enough to do all of this smoothing with. And this is just the first go. I still have some roughness happening, but for the most part, I've pushed around all of those lumps. Now I can take something a little bit smoother. Sometimes I like to just take the blunt end of my fettling knife, not the cutting part, but the back end part, and I'll use that to do some more smoothing. This is a great way to get rid of any of those deep marks you might have put on with the ribs. You're just going to come in, take your time, do as much smoothing as you can. Another great tool would be the back of a metal spoon. It'll help get rid of drag marks, I guess, from the rib. You want to do all of this, especially if you are doing a closed form. I'm going to be doing 3 different types of lids, and this one is one of my open form lids that we're going to be doing on this form. But if you're doing a closed form lid, you want to make sure you blend everything out and do all your designing before we cut open the lid. Smooth up my inside, I can still do that same process. Take a nice rib and get it in there and move around those bits, making sure I get a good smooth as best as possible. Going in and just running this up and using that to smooth. This one I'm going to be adding in coil here to catch the lid. So I want to do as much of my smoothing on the inside now. Once I put that coil in, I'm kind of done with it. Sometimes if this is giving me a whole lot of trouble, I will take a loop tool and I'll use that to come in and scrape away of the inside. And this will remove materials. This is one of those things you only want to do it if your walls are thick enough. But I like to have big thick walls on my pieces so that I have the ability to do these kinds of things. When I get to doing my designing, I have the ability to really carve into my pieces, and I can only do that if I've left myself with thick enough walls so that I can remove material. This shape is the foundation of a house, and this is going to be a Victorian house, of course, because it's me. The ode to a Victorian biscuit. I just wanted to show you that you can do different shapes. It does not have to be round. This is coil built the whole way through, and I can use the same techniques for smoothing here that I've been using for all of my other pieces to do the cleanup and the smoothing. And I am going to be putting a crazy amount of texture on the exterior of this piece to represent shingles and siding. So I'm not going to be too crazy about cleaning up too much of the outside, but I want to make sure that I do get a nice inside. And for these, I did go with a fairly thin coil. I just cut the shape of a footprint, like a floor plan of a house, as my bottom slab, and then just followed the slab with my coil. The same way I did for the round ones. So it really doesn't matter what shape you put down there at the bottom. You can just coil in along and following the coil, and you can build up just about any shape that you can think of. That's the beauty of this coil. This house could have easily been done out of the slab technique, but I just wanted to show the versatility of coil. This coil, it's stronger than slab because you don't have to worry about the joints coming in together. It's a bricklaying type of thing. It is not going to give you those perfect lines that you would get when you use slab. But as you can see, it can also be used for non-organic shapes. It's just going to take a little doing in terms of, you know, my cleanup. Of course, I could have done a better job at the building, but you should know I was building 5 pieces at once. I kind of was moving through them quickly because they're demo pieces. If I spent a little more time on them, the shaping of this probably would have been a lot more perfect than what it is, but it is what it is. You know, you do a better job. Alright y'all, I'm going to call part 1 here. Stay tuned for part 2, where we will be addressing the lids and going over some carving techniques. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and stick around for more wearboard fun.